You know the exact sentence you're waiting for. You have known it for years. You know the wording roughly. You know what it would need to acknowledge, and in what order, and you know how you would feel about 30 seconds after hearing it. You have also known for a long time that it is not coming, and yet some part of you is still holding the position open. Every time they come up in conversation, every time a message arrives, every family occasion, there is a small process that checks whether this might be the time. It never is. And the checking continues anyway. Here's what people say about this, and it is where I want to start, because I think it is wrong. They say the person cannot feel guilt, that there is something missing in them, that you're waiting on an emotional capacity they do not have. That explanation is satisfying, and it is occasionally true, but it is used far more often than it applies, and it has a specific cost, because it puts the whole thing beyond reach. If the other person is defective, there is nothing to understand and nothing to do. The research points somewhere more ordinary and considerably stranger. In most cases, the person who hurt you is not sitting on an apology they refuse to give. They are looking at a version of events in which they do not owe you one. And the differences between their version and yours are large, systematic, and have been measured. I want to show you exactly what those differences are. There's also one specific asymmetry in the middle of this research that explains why the apology, if it ever did arrive, would probably disappoint you. I will come back to it because it changes what you're actually waiting for. Start with the study because it is one of the cleaner pieces of work in social psychology. In 1990, Roy Baumeister, Arlene Stilwell, and Sarah Watman published a paper in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology called Victim and Perpetrator Accounts of Interpersonal Conflict. The method was simple. They asked people for two autobiographical accounts, one about a time somebody made them angry, and one about a time they made somebody else angry. So the same people wrote both, which removes the objection that some people are just more forgiving than others. Then the researchers compared the two sets of accounts. They differed in almost every dimension you can imagine, and they differed consistently. Here's the first difference, and it is the foundation of everything else. Victim accounts place the incident inside a long-term context. There was a history before it. There were consequences afterward. The event was a chapter in something ongoing, and it carried lasting implications, especially continuing harm and grievance. Perpetrator accounts cast the incident as closed. An isolated event, bracketed in time with a beginning and an end and no lasting implications. Read those two descriptions again because they are describing the same event. One person experienced something that started before and continued after. The other experienced something that happened and then stopped. That single difference explains a great deal of what follows, and it explains why the two of you cannot have a productive conversation about it. You're not disagreeing about the details. You are disagreeing about the boundaries of the event. The second difference concerns meaning. Perpetrators describe their own provoking behavior as meaningful and comprehensible. There were reasons. There was a context that made it make sense. Victims describe the same behavior as arbitrary, gratuitous, or incomprehensible. Sit with how strange that is. The thing you have spent years trying to understand, turning over, asking why they would do that, has a straightforward explanation in their account. And in their account, that explanation was available at the time. The third difference is about what led up to it. Baumeister and his colleagues found a pattern in which a victim stifles anger over a series of provocations and then finally responds to the accumulated total. The perpetrator perceives only the single incident, sees a response that appears wildly out of proportion, and concludes the victim overreacted. That is one of the most common shapes an unresolvable conflict takes. Two people, one event, two entirely different accounting periods. Later work made the picture more uncomfortable. Stilwell and Baumeister ran further studies where participants read the same story and retold it, some identifying with the victim and some with the perpetrator. Both groups distorted the account to about the same degree, mainly by leaving out facts that did not suit their role. Perpetrators omitted things that emphasized severity and their own responsibility and embellished mitigating circumstances. But victims distorted too, in the same amount. This is not a video about how your account is unreliable, and I want to be clear about that. Something happened, and your experience of it is real. The point is narrower and more useful. Both roles produce shaped accounts, which means the person you're waiting on is not lying to you in any simple sense. They are reporting a version they genuinely hold, and the shaping happened long before they had to defend anything. Researchers describe the overall pattern as the magnitude gap. The same event is simply a much bigger thing to the person it happened to than to the person who did it. Now the asymmetry I promised, and it explains why the apology would disappoint you. Consider what you're actually waiting for. You're not waiting for the word sorry. You could get that in a text message tomorrow and it would change nothing. What you're waiting for is for them to see it the way you see it, to hold the same size version of the event that you have been holding. To understand that it started before and continued after, that it was not a single incident, that it had consequences they have never had to look at. That is not an apology, that is a request for someone to have had your experience. And the magnitude gap says that the version of the event living in their head is smaller, shorter, and more explicable than yours, which means even a completely sincere apology would be an apology for the smaller thing. You have been waiting for a sentence that would need to be spoken by a person who does not exist, not because they are heartless, but because nobody carries someone else's version of an event they were on the other side of. There's one more layer, and it is about what the waiting costs. Everett Worthington, who has spent a career researching forgiveness, uses the term unforgiveness for a specific state. Not the absence of forgiveness, but an active condition made of resentment, hostility, and rumination, maintained by replaying the transgression. The research finds that this state is physiologically expensive. Recalling a grudge raises blood pressure and heart rate. Sustained rumination of this kind shows the same pattern as chronic stress. That matters here because of a specific detail. Worthington describes what he calls the injustice gap, the distance between how things are and how they ought to be, and notes that a sincere apology narrows it. So you're not being irrational. You're holding out for the one thing that would genuinely make this easier. But you're holding out for it from someone whose version of events does not contain the debt, which brings us to the practical part, and I want to be careful with it. The finding people usually reach for is that forgiveness improves well-being. That is broadly supported. And it is also the point at which most videos become useless, because being told to forgive someone who never acknowledged what they did is not advice. It is an instruction to do something difficult with no method attached. The useful distinction is narrower. Worthington separates decisional forgiveness from emotional forgiveness. Decisional forgiveness is a choice about how you will behave towards someone. Emotional forgiveness is the slower change in how you actually feel. They run on different timescales, and the first does not require the second. And crucially, neither requires an apology, and neither requires reconciliation. You can stop waiting without deciding that what happened was acceptable, without resuming a relationship, and without telling them anything at all. The move that seems to matter most is separating two things you have quietly bundled together. There is what happened, which was real and does not change. And there is the outstanding request that they come to hold your version of it, which is the part that keeps the loop running. The first is a fact. The second is a hope. And it has been running for years on a supply that was never going to arrive. You can release the second without giving up the first. And if this involves someone who caused you serious harm, or if it has shaped years of your life, that is worth working through with a professional rather than alone. Not because your reaction is disproportionate, but because the research on this exists precisely because it is difficult, and there are structured approaches that a video cannot deliver. Here is the reframe worth carrying out of this. You have probably assumed the apology has not arrived because they will not give it, because they are stubborn, or cold, or missing something. The research suggests something plainer. In their version of events, the thing you're waiting for them to apologize for is a smaller event, with reasons attached that ended a long time ago. They are not withholding the apology, they are not holding the same event. And the person who could genuinely say the sentence you have been waiting for would have to be someone who lived it from your side, which is the one thing they will never do. That is the cue most people miss. If you have been waiting a long time for an apology, leave a comment and tell me how long. You do not have to say what it was about. Subscribe to Psychology Q, and I will keep showing you the signals hiding in plain sight.